One thing that they don't tell you in rabbinical school is that when you get ordained, suddenly everyone you know feels compelled to give you Judaica. Some of you perhaps might have been compelled to give me Judaica. Don't get the wrong idea. I love it. Menorahs, yads, shofars. I love receiving Judaica. Sometimes a gift card might be nice, but giving a rabbi Judaica makes perfect sense. In my short career of happily accepting Jewy gifts, I have somehow come to own no less than 3 statues of Moses. I have one right here. You know I love a prop. 2 of them actually look exactly like this. Replicas of Michelangelo's famous 16th century sculpture, which is in fact, as you may know, one of the most recognizable images of Moses in the world. And most scholars understand that this exact sculpture is actually based off of this week's Torah portion, Tisa. We read at the end of the Parsha that when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, his face beamed with radiant light, a sign that he had spoken with God face to face. Represented here with these beams of light coming out of his head. And of course, as we know, they're somewhat questionable. Medieval sculptors made Jews look like that, and it led to all kinds of anti-Semitic tropes, but be that as it may. He's also got the tablets of the law there, the 10 Commandments, and also just what we understand to be the tables of the law in our tradition as a nod as well to this week's Torah portion. And his left arm, flexing actually an impressive bicep, seems ready for battle. It's actually, if you think about it, kind of a confusing, complex mix of imagery. And it's unclear what's going on in his mind through this depiction, yielding many theories over the centuries. Even Sigmund Freud weighed in on this specific representation of Moses and what it was trying to convey emotionally. In Freud's view, this sculpture expresses Moses' deep pain, mingled with contempt toward the Israelites, which you wouldn't necessarily assume just by looking at it. But returning to the Torah portion, we get a better sense of why this reading and this interpretation might be true. After spending 40 days on Mount Sinai, receiving instruction from God, the people at the foot of Mount Sinai, or at the foot of the mountain, lose faith that Moses will ever come back. They convince his brother Aaron to make for them an idol to worship, giving them their jewelry, which he fashions into the famous golden calf. When Moses descends the mountain and sees the people idol worship with his own eyes, he becomes furious. He hurls the tablets of the law onto the ground, thereby destroying them. It's one of the most evocative, famous moments in the entire Torah. Moses comes down from Sinai with the tablets of the law written by God, God's self, sees the people partying around the golden calf, and with a crash of the tablets, the party's over. He destroys the handiwork of God. You might think that Moses would regret doing so. And it's true that some rabbinic texts criticize him for acting out of anger in this moment, destroying the tablets of God. But many more commentators suggest that this was exactly the right thing for Moses to do. Talmudic sages go so far as to say that God was delighted when Moses destroyed the tablets. Reish Lakish suggests that God says Yasher Koach, in fact, directly to Moses in this moment. The rabbis reasoned that according to Jewish law, heretics are not allowed to perform certain commandments. And if that's true, then the Israelites didn't deserve the uniquely sacred tablets of the law in this particular moment of their heresy. The rabbis understood the tablets of the law as synecdochic of the entire Torah. And so if the people were not willing to accept the Torah wholesale, then they didn't deserve the tablets at all. An early 20th century commentator known as the Meshech Chochmah goes one step further. Its author, Rabbi Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, suggests that until this moment, the people actually treated Moses as a kind of demigod himself. And while he was away on top of the mountain, when the Israelites' earthly conduit for God was gone, they couldn't help themselves but turn to other physical entities which they could see. They might have repurposed the existing sanctuary or tabernacle for idol worship, and therefore the people might have bowed down to the tablets themselves should they have received them in this mindset of needing a physical manifestation of the divine. In this reading, Moses shattered the tablets as a safeguard against the tablets themselves becoming idols. Clearly, if the people were so fragile and anxious that they needed to build a calf when they didn't have a physical expression of God before them, the people were not ready to receive the far holier tablets of the law. At this moment, the Meshech Chochmah explains, Moses understood their error and became enraged. If he were to bring them the tablets, they would have simply exchanged the calf for the tablets and would never have corrected their error. In other words, Moses needed to teach them a lesson. That in fact, nothing tangible will ever approximate the awesome power of a God that is invisible, the God whom the Torah insists upon believing. We might be more charitable to where the Israelites were coming from. Recently freed from slavery, nervous, dependent on a leader that they can see to give them guidance. What reason do they really have in their minds to believe in an invisible God? Many of us struggle with the very same idea when we may not ever feel like we encounter God directly. How could we be certain that God exists? Understandable though this might be, Moses still destroys the tablets to disavow the Israelites of this attitude and to teach them this lesson. Even the places and things we think of as holy, for them, all kinds of different things as prescribed in the Torah, but for us, our synagogues, the land of Israel, our ancient texts, and more. All of these different things can become idolatrous if we are not careful to remember that they are not holy themselves, but merely containers for the holy. Over the years, some of you have shared that you, in fact, feel uncomfortable about kissing the Torah when it is paraded about in services, since doing so feels a little bit like idolatry. Not naming names, you know who you are. This feeling has an ancient precedent in Moses in this week's Parsha, or at least in the way that the Meshech Chochmah describes him. Those entities that we often think of as holy are merely tools for us to access God. This beautiful chapel, the ritual items and Judaica that we use, the prayer books in our hands, are only holy if they allow us to access some deeper meaning in our prayer experience. And indeed, the words of the prayers themselves are not inherently holy unless we allow them to bring us closer to an experience of the divine. There's a reason why we don't typically have sculptures like the one I shared just here in our synagogues, the way that we might find in some churches. We are good at discerning idolatry in things that look like idols. But there may be things we treat as idols even if they aren't quite so obvious. As we look at our own Jewish experience today, we might ask ourselves, what are the things that we hold sacred? Is it prayer? Is it a certain melody that we depend on to feel like we're praying? Is it a relationship with a certain clergy person, or a certain place, or a certain idea? Is the continuity of any of these things truly sacred? Sometimes we look at continuity itself, communal continuity, or the continuity of our ritual tastes, or even continuity of the things we cherish in our secular lives, as if they are sacred, but without some higher purpose. Focusing our energy on these things may approach idolatry. Because what makes something truly holy is the extent to which it is a vessel for some holy mission. And so, sometimes, it becomes necessary to break the things that we think of as holy, to remember what actually is. Shabbat Shalom.